Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members, Garrett Vollendroff, staff and guests. Lobbies are open. Recording has begun.
Thanks, Dustin. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll convene the executive management team meeting for Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. Our first item up today is a legislative update with our legislative director, Mark Webster.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and members, Garrett Vollendroff. We are hard at work, as you know, implementing the bills passed in 2024. And of course, we are still in the midst of rulemaking and implementation of the big 2023 bills like social equity and the THC bill. You all hear from Cassidy and the rules team on that, but we can circulate that implementation tracker to you all again. That was the tool developed by the incomparable Jessica Dang that we developed last year. So we can kind of keep an eye on all the things on the plate, whether provisos or bills, where all those projects stand. It is not super detailed, as you know, for detailed rules, timelines, and whatnot. Obviously, talk to Cassidy, but it's a handy way to kind of get one clear view of all of those things and where they are. As always, we'd love some feedback on that, what to include, maybe what to exclude. Member Vollendroff, you had some very good suggestions last year that we included. We've got an internal team meeting to keep that work updated, and we can bring a live view of that implementation tracker to a future EMT, as we've done, I think, a couple times in the past. It is definitely time to start thinking about our legislative agenda for 2025. It is coming up fast, and to date, I've got several ideas from licensing and E&E on what I would basically call RCW cleanup. This is not sweeping policy changes, but removing archaic license types and also making sure that mass permitting rules apply across the board, and we're not missing any license types for that. So at this point, I've tried to pull all of those into one, but that's not a final decision. None of this is a final decision. We need to do some more work on getting that ready before it's ready for you, but just know that that's in the works. I've heard from folks wanting to look at product placement and where physically in a store alcoholic products can be placed, especially given the growth in crossover products that have a name and branding of a non-alcohol thing. I think Will just talked to me about ocean spray alcoholic things, which is something I never thought.
I've seen that one.
Yeah. So there are more and more of these on the market, and we're starting to see states try to restrict how stores display them or where they put them. We've also been talking in recent days about mini bottles. I know you're aware of that, Mr. Chair. Another area of interest to the public health community as well as to the board. Now, I've heard from members and some stakeholders that they think that certain statutory fixes to social equity could be needed. I think it's a little early for that, given that we're not completed with the rulemaking there. But I think we or you will be getting requests to have some sort of a trailer bill, some sort of a cleanup effort of one kind or another. I haven't seen anything, but I get the sense that that might be coming. Okay. And of course, there are many issues that we've seen in prior years that are almost certain to come back. Alcohol delivery is a big one. Cannabis signage, as you know, we had a big discussion about that last year. Dedicated cannabis account distribution. So that was last changed in 2022. I wouldn't be surprised if people took a look at that again. And many others. So we'll try to get some discussions going with stakeholders and you all, so we kind of can get out ahead of some of those perennial issues. And with that, like, what else is on your mind, and what problems do you see that we can address? It doesn't have to be right now in this meeting, but definitely want to be talking about that in the weeks and months to come.
I do want to just endorse some thought going into product placement questions. And I think the first thing, I think I asked this in one of those emails yesterday, but we need to figure out what we can do today without statutory authority.
Right.
And that could help determine. But the other piece of that is just the placement of alcohol with kids' toys, kids' candy, things like that. It struck me as just such a low-hanging fruit for retailers to fix on their own, but they have not. And so I'm pretty committed to trying to do something about that, either through rule or statute. Member Garrett and Member Vollendroff. You're muted. William?
On the mini bottle placement, and Becky and I talked about this a few weeks ago, because I thought, and I remember years ago we discussed this. It was an in-depth conversation, and I thought something was done back then where they couldn't be on display at checkout and when you walked in the door or things. But Becky reminded me that it was more because during that time it was a lot of theft going on, young people stealing the little small bottles and on and on. But it wasn't something that was put in place. It was more of a recommendation. Is that what you were telling me, Becky? A suggestion that we put out to people to not have them. I thought something was done because folks, everybody took them away. They even put things behind the counter. And I forgot what all was going on back then when that occurred and all of that stuff was removed. So I was surprised about a month or so ago when I started seeing them out front again as soon as you walk in the door, visible. But I don't know what we did back then for sure, Becky, to see is that something we want to do again, even if it was only recommendations or suggestions and things on the mini bottles being right there at the front register at the front door. That's one thing. And on the other, I'm hearing a lot of talk on the cannabis lounges and having cannabis lounge. And part of the problem is to do with air control. And on my meeting yesterday with research, I asked the question, how is it that cities like Tacoma can have a cigar lounge? Certain cities have cigar lounge, and that has to have been some of the same concern, air quality, but then some cities don't have it because of air quality and things. How was Tacoma? And I don't know if there's others. I just know of the one in Tacoma. How are they able to have cigar lounges?
Do you, Becky or Mark, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, so we don't license the cigar lounges. That it's just like a hookah lounge that they're not allowed to serve alcohol in those venues. So I'm not sure how they get licensed. That they might be a private club that allows those cigars to be smoked. So it depends on the license. But that's not something, the air quality would be a concern of ours, certainly.
And Will and I had this discussion, I don't know, a couple of months ago about that, and thinking that you might see some of those consumption lounges on tribal land. And I do wonder if the one in Tacoma that you're speaking on is on Puyallup Reservation land, which is
They own a lot of that land.
they own a lot of that land.
It's
So I don't know if that's the answer.
we Googled yesterday. It's called Smoky Point.
Yeah, well, we should look into that and answer that
Yeah.
question. The other thing about, and we've had some people ask us licensees about the possibility that we've talked to some tribes about, at least they've just done event-based, not a permanent sort of social cannabis consuming thing. I think the smoke's a big part. There's others too, though. You can't, right now, you don't know how much you can smoke before it's safe to drive. And that's a big thing that I hear when this comes up. Most people, even though it gets abused horribly, know how much to drink or how much to wait before they drink again. But Member Vondra?
Just quickly on the product placement, and I've mentioned this to a couple people, so some of you will be hearing this as a repeat, but during last session, former Representative Ruth Kagi came up to me and said, "Hey, I understand you're on the Liquor and Cannabis Board. I want to tell you a story." And so she went on to tell me this story about product placement and mini bottles of alcohol, where a constituent came up to her and said, "Hey, I'd like you to run a bill around prohibiting that from occurring." And she said she approached our legislative liaison at the time, who assured her that she didn't need to run a bill because we would take care of that. And she said, "I learned my lesson right then and there, never to do that again." So I hope we do something about those mini bottles. And I sent Will some photos from a place down in Lewis County that they're literally right at and there's like not just one thing of them, but an entire wall of them.
Yeah.
And second part of that is, I just talked to Becky about this. I would really appreciate if we could talk about it from a couple of different perspectives. One is obviously theft. Two is obviously access for underage individuals. But I'd also like to start talking about it from the perspective of individuals in recovery and make that a part of our conversation and a part of what we are looking out for. Upwards of 10% of the population suffers from substance use disorders. And one of the things that we know is that when you're in recovery, you avoid the alcohol aisle altogether. That's just a simple common sense way to make sure that you're not triggered by all of the advertisement and inundated with all this stuff. And it's virtually impossible anymore because alcohol is all over the store. And so I'd like for us to, in our messaging, in our discussions about it, be thinking about this 10% of the population that we also have an obligation to look out for. I can't tell you the number of people I know who have impulse bought alcohol because it was placed in an area other than the alcohol aisle. They would have gone into the store, gotten their gallon of milk and gone home, but because they had an extremely stressful day, because they were having a lot of anxiety, because of a number of things based on placement. And we know that all those items at checkout are all about opportunity and placement and impulse buying, that they cause relapse. So I just like that to be part of the conversation about why we're taking this on, not just about youth, which of course is incredibly important, not just about shoplifting, which of course is incredibly important, but because of the nature of substance use disorders and people in recovery.
Yeah, I want to assure you we are. In fact, we worked on a statement yesterday about this problem. It includes that very specifically, Jim. So that is, and I've talked to
Great.
Kristen about this since the day she started. We've spent a lot of time on it, and that is always part of the conversation. And the reading I've done, you can find industry journals that talk about the benefit of impulse presentation. They don't talk about going after people in recovery, but it is, there's good, they have good science on how many people go to the store thinking they'll buy booze, how many buy booze if they see it. And so one, it is partly to put it at the cash register, but also partly to put it at places you're not expecting to see it. You put the, margarita mix and the tequila next to beach balls and buckets. And I sent a picture to Kristen the other day from my local Target that was Barbie candy at the end of the aisle, and the other end cap is spiked lemonade. And
Crazy.
So it's, yeah. And if it's true that we asked the industry at one point to do this voluntarily, and this is what we have today, if that's what we did, then and I'm more worried about product placement in general than I am outlawing mini bottles myself at this point. But we asked them to do something on product placement also, and we got crickets, nothing back from them. So we really need to do something about this.
And I think that's what's confusing to me, because when you talk about Jim, and having these conversations and everything you just brought up, that was the conversation. We had the conversation. We had a lot of conversation around the mini bottles placement. And it was when we were having, Becky, if you can recall, when we used to have our meetings, and it was we bought the alcohol industry together, and all of them that's part of that industry, they're the ones that actually bought it to us. It was the industry that bought it to us, and there was a lot of conversation. All of this stuff we're talking about and that you brought up now, Jim, it was some deep conversation. And for the life of me, I can't remember what happened, but something happened and they stopped doing it. They went away. They put them behind the register. They locked them up. I don't know what we did, but and was it because of the alcohol? I forgot what we used to call our groups and stuff, that we got them involved in it. That group. Yes, Becky.
So you're right. It was the Alcohol Advisory Group. And
Right.
so this happened after 1183. So when 1183 happened and the state stopped selling alcohol, what happened was that it went into all these grocery stores. They started putting alcohol at the front. And what they saw was this huge rise in what was being stolen out of the stores. And so during that Alcohol Advisory Group meeting, one of the things that we discussed was where they could, that we would put something out and ask for voluntary compliance, recommend that they lock these products up. And they did just that. I mean, that most of the, that most of the stores pulled it out, locked it up. They certainly have room because we see them locking up all kinds of other things now behind the counter, whether it's, that toothpaste or,
locking up the deodorant and
laundry.
Yeah.
So that they have the space for it. And you're also right, David. We just recently sent out back this past October, I believe, a request to as far as product placement of the small mini bottles, and we haven't seen changes or a shift.
Can somebody find me something from that conversation years ago? Was there ever anything memorialized on a piece of paper or anything? Because this is the first time hearing of it. And when we wrote, I wrote a letter to the industry 2 years ago almost. And I had no idea, but it changes my perception a little bit that we've already tried the voluntary route now twice, a couple of years ago and 2 years ago. And I think it's time we really need to look at what we can do by rule, if not by statute. Director Wax.
Yeah, when we did it, it worked. When we did do it, it worked. But
short term.
Yeah,
right,
short term.
But Becky, but you're right. David, it was when we had the Alcohol Advisory Group and we brought all of the various organizations together and they reached out to their folks.
Right.
So
But
I think that was the key.
They don't have any authority to enforce, and clearly in this case, they gave it up if they were doing it. It's interesting, there was a really good bill that passed in Michigan recently, and that bill too came from the industry. I think the industry around the country is seeing that this is changing. We've seen bills in Minnesota, Michigan, Virginia, and I don't want us to be last. Director Wax.
I would just say that this is something that when enforcement is out working with our retail locations, this is the advice they give them. And there are large chain stores and small stores that comply with that advice and take that advice. Safeway is a great example. You can go in and see the physical remodels and restructure of their sales where they're locking up a predominant amounts of their liquor. We're certainly working with other large chain store, one in particular right now, that will say, oh, good advice, thank you, move it, and then it will come back. I think this is a situation where the industry is sandwiched between the things that we're talking about, those social responsibilities, and pressure too from marketers and the people selling the product that want it to be front and center, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But this is something that we advise on in enforcement pretty regularly, and we're doing so at 3 major locations right now.
Again, if you look at what the industry is writing for their own appetite on these things, alcohol sales are down in the United States. They're losing younger people and women, and they're looking for ways to recapture the market. And this is touted as one of the ways to do. There's people out there that say, hey, I can help you maximize impulse sales. We don't need to be helping that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. Quickly, Mark, one other thing, and we've talked to Rep. Davis about this, but I anticipate that high THC concentration products will come up in some fashion. She just lost her LA, and so she's asked that she's rehiring, and as soon as she rehires her LA, she does want to have a conversation. And you were in that meeting we had with Kristen the other day with the prevention folks, and so I think that there's some appetite to continue that conversation as well. So just keeping that on the radar.
Try to loop her into those conversations. Should she be invited?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move to licensing and turn it back over to you, Becky.
Okay. Here we go. So a couple of licensing updates I just wanted to highlight for the board. That we have a lot happening in licensing right now, a lot of
Mhm.
changes going on. I think that as you can see here, that we have a current recruitment, that we're in the process of hiring a new licensing specialist supervisor in our liquor unit. The supervisor that is currently in that role has moved over to help with the systems modernization project. That because that project is so important, that we have dedicated some of our best staff to making sure that we get the best product in the end. So the supervisor has training, he has experience, he knows our licensing system, so I think he'll be a great addition. But of course, that means that change is about to happen for licensing again. And then I've spoken a lot about this lately, but as of this Friday, Heidi Braley, our licensing manager on the liquor side, will be retiring after 33 years, working just for the Liquor and Cannabis Board. That
Wow.
it's amazing.
That is amazing.
It's amazing that has stayed in licensing. She's worked in, that on the liquor side the whole time. So she takes with her all of this experience on the MIW side, on, that when it comes to wineries and breweries, and so we've been training our staff, throughout this time, and making sure that we're prepared as we can be. We've just finished second interviews, so I'm hoping that my deputy will have a decision, hopefully by the end of the week, in who's going to be filling that position. And then we're also in the middle of hiring for an interview. Well, we're interviewing for a program specialist 5, that for the social equity manager. As you know, Sarah Davis has been in the role for the past few years since we started, actually since that position became available. She has accepted a promotion. I think it's exciting for her to be able to promote, but she's done such a wonderful job in that, in social equity. I'm also sad to have her move on, but I'm glad she's staying in licensing, and she's still going to be helping us with social equity as well. And then we're, of course, in the middle of, that as these positions open up and change, that that the lowest level positions in our division are always customer service positions. And so we always fluctuate in having openings in those areas. And then these are the employees that we've hired in the last couple of months, in the last 60 days, that 2 managers, brand new managers to our agency, but fantastic leaders. One coming from the Department of Licensing, that he's taken over customer service, new eyes, that new energy. We're excited to have Eugene join us. And then for our other manager, it's Desiree Monroe. She also comes with a lot of state service and on the legislative side, on the rules side. And she is our new, oh my gosh, what is she? She is our policy and education manager. And then I mentioned Sarah as well. So I just wanted to let you know about those folks. And then I wanted to talk a bit about the cannabis-infused edible label submissions, because I've heard a lot about this since in the last week or so. And so I wanted just to bring some realities to sometimes what we hear and what we experience is somewhat different. So what we have here is in blue is the email submissions. So in the month of January, we received 22 emails. Out of 22 emails, they contained 94 labels. So you only see 22, but there's actually 94 labels within those 22 emails. Next, you see the 22 labels out of 94 in January were required no revision, and 72 required revision. That means something within that label needed to be redone. And then the next shows the number of labeled approved in January was 57, and they took 17 days to approve. Susan has 14 days to review a label when it's received, and they're reviewed in the order that they were received. Revisions are treated in the same way. So if somebody has to do a revision, they have to start over. So they have to resubmit their application or their revised submission. And Susan, again, takes them in the order that they're received. I think that what we've seen in the month of May with the passing of Senate House Bill 1453 with the temporary excise tax exemption, was that we started to receive a lot more labels. That in May, it was just, you can see that the amount of labels went up. It also, we also had an unexpected leave for Susan. So Susan was out of the office, not on vacation, as everybody thought and said, oh, this lady's out on vacation. She was out on emergency leave. And so that was for 3 weeks. And during her absence, we experienced, again, a high level of submissions that a lot of revisions that needed to happen. And what we found was that we added staff to be able to review those submissions. Because they were new to reviewing, it took a longer time. And so we found that, where we had some need to make some changes. So where we also find some need to make some changes is that right now we're working on our strategic plan. And what I'll tell you is that we are in the middle of making some videos and some PowerPoint presentations about submitting correct labels. We clearly need to do it. We're starting the work in July. The cool thing about this, though, is that with the new LCB website, and I think Brian will talk a bit about that, we'll be able to embed those videos on our website. So it's something that the public can go in, or our licensees can go in and watch over and over again. Because again, I think that somewhere with these submissions having to be resubmitted and resubmitted, we're missing where people are struggling, and this way we'll have some ability to see how many people are hitting that website as well, and where we need to make some changes. And we're going to be reaching out to the industry once we make those videos to see what's that does this hit the point of helping. We want to make sure that we're that this is efficient for them, it's efficient for us, but really the more efficient they are in submitting the labels correctly, the better it is for us. And we're hopefully looking at adding some resources in this area too. This is a one-person shop, and cannabis labels is only one piece of what she does. So I just wanted to share that. I knew that there had been some questions out there, and wanted just to address those as far as how much time it's actually taking. And then last slide here is around our.
Can I make a quick comment before we move on, Becky? Just quickly wanted to support the idea of additional staff helping with that particular body of work, and expanding it potentially to other products that we regulate. The other thing is to throw out there, and I know you and I've had this discussion, but just to get a broader audience to the idea, when Susan asked folks in NCSLA, in CANRA, sorry, about labeling and that kind of stuff, we found out that other states charge for submission. So for every time you want to submit a label, you're charged for that, and that it reduced potentially the back and forth, nitpicky kind of stuff, because people were paying for this. And to me, that's something I think we should consider. It's a legitimate body of work that we do. It's a transaction that takes time and effort. So just throwing out there that I think we should consider charging for some of these labels, particularly on the cannabis side.
And we are doing a lot of to that. I want the board to know that we are doing a lot of work right now, working with with Sarah Oakey and her research folks as well, that we want to take a look at what is the best way to review our products, not just cannabis, but liquor as well. Is there a point that a team needs to review it? Is there a few people and then it moves over to a team when there's too many questions back and forth about a label, and have that team set up with folks from throughout our agency, not just licensing, not just enforcement, but some folks that have a kind of a new lens and seeing something different. So both Sarah Oki and Sarah Davis and Susan have been doing some research on what other states are doing as well. So we want to be able to bring that back and share with the board and with the director about what our recommendations would be moving forward.
Right. The other thing, though, I want to say about it, it's not just about, and I have not gotten any complaints about the amount of time it takes or anybody being away. But and Becky, you and I have talked about this issue since I got here, but if we're going to be spending some time thinking about this process, we should also spend some time talking about the policy behind it and
Absolutely.
make sure that we all know what it is, why we're doing what we do, and make sure that the board who has to, rule on the appeals understands the policy behind it, because it may also be time to reconsider some of what's been in place on the cannabis side for 10 years as we've, adjusted other things. Is it all still necessary? And are we, being consistent between concerns around, alcohol and cannabis and mixing and those sorts of things? So I'm glad the conversation's taken place, but let's also make sure that we're talking about the policy behind it, not just the process.
Yep, absolutely. And I, I know that there's a meeting on Friday about a lot of placement of products of alcohol that Kristen is meeting or heading up, and the research folks and the rules folks and licensing and I believe enforcement will all be part of those conversations as well. So that back to what you'd shared with me earlier, we certainly need to be asking the question of who needs to be involved in these conversations, who needs to be in the know. And you're right. I think that we'd like to see the rules stronger in order to help drive some of this process. And then I also will mention as part of this is that I'm later on this week, I'm out of state, but we're going to be talking about that crossover product is something that is happening on the national level. It's conversations that folks are having in a lot of other states. So we will be talking about crossover beverages, marketing, trade practice, concerns from both the regulators and the industry. So I think that what we learn, and there's several of us attending, but what we learned from that conversation, I think we'll certainly bring back to share with everyone.
Great.
And then one last slide I did just want to mention is that that the small business liaisons, we have a small business liaison at our agency that sits in licensing. And my team's very involved, and it's because that we do want to understand the barriers when it comes to small business and operating a small business. So we have a staff that's attending with a lot of other agencies to talk to small businesses in Yakima on the 27th. But again, it's a lot of planning goes on. We do this with just talking to small businesses, but this is all state agencies coming together to have conversations as well. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions for Becky?
Thank you.
No. Okay. We'll move to an enforcement education update with Director West.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for the opportunity to present data and take questions. Thank you, Justin. Of course, my mic is on.
Oh.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present data and ask questions. Thanks, Justin, for driving slides. First, just for a frame of reference, obviously I put up a number of licenses that we manage, licensee locations, and I like to harass our liquor team a little bit when we talk about the percentage of cannabis locations that our staff has visited for the year, and then ask liquor, why haven't you been to 70? And they look at me with disdain much of the time, but it just gives me a good frame of reference when we start out. So I like to share the same with you, but we'll start by talking about complaints. And you can see on this slide that complaints in liquor stayed pretty consistent for the month of May. And then one of the things that I know that the board and director's office is interested in is internally generated complaints. And so when we look at those cannabis complaints, one of the things that to note, or that I noted in the data, was 89% of our cannabis complaints this month were internally generated. And many of those are through the lens that we're looking at our traceability data now with alerts. So going through and checking on those alerts, and many of them, as you'll see when we get further into the data, were not substantiated. For example, producers who are currently not growing, that would throw a flag in traceability because it would say they're not entering info in the system. And then so we would go check on that, see that it's because there's no info to enter, and move along. So that's some of the numbers that you'll see this time. And then also you see that the consultants, when we get complaints that are easily, we can see that they can be resolved by education and wouldn't result in enforcement, those go right to the consultants. So that's why you're seeing that increase. Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question on the
Yeah.
last thing you just said on the alert? So right, we now do have alerts working in CCRS?
Yes, we do have them.
That's great.
Mhm.
Let's look
And
at
I
it.
can send you some numbers, or even maybe next time present on some numbers and what we're seeing
Yeah, I'd be
there.
interested. That's great. Good.
Yeah, absolutely. And then 68% of those tobacco vape complaints were internally generated as well, just based on the checks that we're doing there. Moving on to look at the number of complaints we see that are related to public safety. You see that that stays pretty consistent at 55%. We do have more of a higher public safety number this month related to those traceability complaints because that's connected to diversion. And so that falls into the public safety category as well. Next slide, looking specifically at education data and violations, you can see there was a 14% increase in education contacts from 22 to 23. Our use of NTCs continues to increase, and will do so as long as we have those compliance consultants out there documenting their education. And then let's see, it looks like pretty consistent numbers across the board, and we are on target. The NTCs again are higher, but on target to be the same as this year as we were last year. We look specifically at licensee education. Total number of contacts thus far for the second quarter of 24 is up over 4,600, which is great that we're getting out there and educating our licensees. And when we look at that contact breakdown specifically by industry and by year, just to get a good idea of who's doing how much of that education. Next slide, in liquor, 6,800 contacts, cannabis, 913. And then consultants, we pull out even further so that you can see the difference that our officers are still out there doing education. The consultants are also doing almost 3,000 education contacts just this year so far. Great numbers, a great opportunity for us to, as we talk about assisting our licensees with compliance. For the month of May alone, the division conducted 470 hours of education. So that is very impressive. Next slide, and we'll start looking at May education topics. This is fairly consistent with what we see each month. You can see that those regulatory topics, helping licensees with compliance, and then of course, always out there educating about the importance of youth access and those public safety topics, and then helping out with licensing and permits, and then new licensee support. Those are the top 5 topics that are taking up our time and that our licensees are asking questions about. When we look at the topics for NTCs or notice to corrects, the top 5 topics, engaging in non-retail conditional sales, you'll notice that this is a new one. And it came to the top. We had some complaints about this, specifically about some producers, processors, and the prices at which they were offering things to their retail clients. And so this turned into a very specific investigation looking into those. And it just made our top 5 this month because it involved so many different entities. And then the typical non-compliance with record keeping, general advertising, failure to use traceability, or maintain the required surveillance system. Very appropriate topics for notice to corrects and helping licensees get on track. When we start looking at the violation breakdown for 2024, you'll see liquor, their warnings and AVNs, and then tobacco and vapor, and then over in cannabis, warnings, AVNs, and NTCs. We had 47 warnings in the month of May and then 1 AVN. So seeing how staff are using those different tools for the right topics. When we look at AVNs and what we use those AVNs for in the month of May, you can see that youth access issue being our priority. And then of course you see sailor service to apparently intoxicated persons and conduct violations showing up with larger numbers than they usually do for a month. And we thought this was interesting and went to look and see if it was one particular region or how this is, and this is across the state in several different regions. And so I compliment our captains on what this looks like to me as consistency, and everyone is talking about the same things, looking at public safety and enforcing things consistently across the state. Instead of sometimes what we would see is one region focusing on one issue and another. So this is a data reflection of our enforcement teams doing things right.
What would be included in conduct violation? Is that like employee drinking or something like that?
After hours service, like,
Gotcha.
yeah, those types of things. When we look at our warning topics for May, the things that we're out there taking a little bit more seriously, not quite to the AVN level, you can see that the tobacco team out there doing their MSA agreement checks, masked violations, failure to use and maintain traceability, non-compliance with record keeping, and then tax reports. So you're seeing data very consistent across the board that we are using warnings, notice to corrects, and education until it's clear that it's either a public safety violation or more serious efforts need to be made. Looking at alternative disputes resolutions, you can see that we still have low numbers in places where compromises are not reached, or it is going forward to a formal hearing. In the liquor unit, the same is true for cannabis. We had 2 in March move forward to formal hearing, but not in April or May. And then the same is not reaching a compromise, 1 in March and none in April or May. So we're still being successful at resolving situations at the lowest level possible, even in that regard. I have to give you a little warning here. You're not going to like this data, but I do want to talk about how we get here. Yeah. So I'll share a quick story. When I saw this data for the first time, we talked about it, asked lots of questions, and then apparently we moved on and presented about the cannabis compliance data and the delivery compliance, and I completely missed it. I had to rewind because my brain was still so focused on this data. So let's talk about why we're here. When we look at this number, 240 compliance checks were conducted. Again, to say out loud, that's our officers' work, doing those compliance checks. The compliance rate is our licensee's responsibility and ensuring that we're not selling to youth. So last year, mid-year, July, we made a change. We were not randomly assigning compliance checks. And so officers were selecting areas where they would go. And sometimes it was very popular areas, areas we were hearing about, areas close to freeways and main traffic locations, those types of things. And so we had locations that weren't getting checks and types of locations that weren't getting checks. And so what's happened is we've been doing that for almost a year, and we're to the point where 64% of those checks that were conducted are for on-premise locations. So locations that don't sell alcohol as frequently and don't get compliance checks as frequently, or maybe haven't in years had a compliance check. So when we start looking at why this number is so low, that is a contributor. The other thing that this helps us see is that when we're talking about how else can we impact youth access, it's really important to look at those on-premise locations as well.
Yeah.
So this was shocking for all of us. I knew it would be a show stealer here today, and it
Is that the
certainly.
low? When was the last time we had such a low compliance rate for liquor?
I will tell you that Mark Siegfried, who does our data analysis, said that he has 13 years of data and hasn't seen it this low. So moving on, although I suspect.
minute.
maybe-
Sorry. I was looking for something that I can't find right now. And I had sent it to Sarah Oki, and I'll send it to you, Director Wax.
Thank
But I
you.
found a gentleman who has done a lot of work nationally around sales to minors. And so I was talking to him recently, and I introduced him to Sarah so that they could have some conversation. And when I shared with him our compliance rates, he was shocked at 80% and saying that's too low. 80% is shockingly low. And so when I see these numbers, I mean, we should be, I think, very alarmed. And I think we should, I don't know, come up with a specific, actionable, trackable plan of how we're going to reverse these. But I do have, significant concern about these. And I hope, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm hoping to hear from others what suggestions you might have, or what is the plan to reverse these trends. And what do people think about 80% not being acceptable? And that's our highest in the 5-6 months that we have in front of us.
I would just say, and so everyone else knows, I know you know this, Board Member Vollendroff, but we are meeting with our public health partners and our public health liaison and our partners at DOH to talk about the other things. I know our communications director has been in on some of those meetings to talk about other things we can do to impact youth access in the state of Washington. And it's something that I'm excited that you forwarded some information about a contact to Sarah Oki. It's a topic that I've selected for my own dissertation, so it's been very interesting researching the other things that have impact. But I think it needs to be a priority for us and for the state of Washington.
Great.
And that's one of the reasons why we made the 2 changes we made last year. If you remember, one was doing randomly assigned checks, and the other one was pausing the rechecks so we could assign more resources to doing more checks at unique locations, for which we've been successful, obviously, because we're getting to those on-premise locations.
And so if we were able to do as many rechecks as we were doing before and all these, I'm sure the rate would be even worse, because the rechecks do find repeat violations.
They do.
Not every time, of course.
Not
but
every time, but
It's
they
not
do.
unusual, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have a benchmark, or is there a national benchmark that we should be targeting towards?
Well,
Like,
this is
like, could we have a line across here, across this slide that says, here's our target? And so every month seeing what's that variance between actual and target?
I certainly am willing to suggest something. We have had this conversation before, and I have said that I have a hard time recommending that our target should be anything but 100%. Because
I like that answer.
A one sale to youth, it's too many sales.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to say or recommend that we say any number of youth access sales is acceptable.
We, the other board members could tell me if they remember differently, but we've never looked at a sale to youth where it seemed a totally unavoidable accident, right? Like, there was always a point in there where it could have been prevented by just careful work.
Yeah.
It's never out of the control. At least, again, what we've seen, maybe they go elsewhere, but from what the board has seen, never seen one where we're not talking about fake IDs, right? Because our people use real IDs.
Yep. Yeah, I would say that one of the things we will hear from licensees, and we do hear from licensees, is that sometimes they feel like they've done everything they can in buying the systems and training their employees. And so in that regard, they feel like it's out of their control because the employee has made the error, but we're all dealing with humans, so.
I look forward to reading your dissertation.
Me too. My current draft is 2 weeks late, so my teacher too. I'm ready to move on to the next
Okay.
slide whenever you guys are. We'll talk about delivery curbside pickup compliance. Obviously, we were focusing on some of those on-premise liquor checks, and so we didn't do any checks in this month for curbside, so there is no rate as opposed to 0%, which is what that slide reflects. And then when we look at the cannabis compliance for youth access, we are going to celebrate success where it's due, and this is an acceptable number. This is an acceptable compliance rate in my book at 100%. So good job to the cannabis industry. And tobacco and vapor compliance for youth access is at 87%. And one of the checks and balances we use for this is our staff across the state, our LCB LEOs. We also have a partnership with our FDA team, and they do checks as well. And their compliance rate was 88% this month. So we always make sure that that's pretty comparable. There's no reason why it shouldn't be.
And interesting that, even with a wide variation in how many are visited, the percent is fairly consistent here as opposed to what we saw with liquor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll see the fewer numbers, obviously, like with any data, the fewer numbers we do, the more impact one failure will have.
Right, sure.
But yeah, it's fairly consistent. When we look at premise checks, and this is just our staff getting out there, and this is where I give the liquor team a little bit of undeserved grief, because cannabis has 77% of our locations out there visited, right? They have compliance consultants making those visits, officers making those visits, and so liquor has made 33% of those visits, which is yeoman's work. It's great work, and they're out there seeing a number of people. So you can see that we're out there and we are visiting our licensees and supporting them and supporting public safety. We track ID checks because we believe that it's another way to impact youth access. It's just another way that when we're out there and we see youthful appearing persons, we're saying, hey, let me see your ID. And hopefully that's what our licensee employees are doing as well. So we're just supporting them. When you look at the work production by our CRI team, criminal history records information, they do work for most of the divisions in our agency, definitely HR for hiring. We do backgrounds for licensing. You can see that they're keeping very busy with cannabis renewals and also the licensing background checks. We created this slide to look at our top advertising requests for the month of May. Top examiner requests. I missed a slide on my own stack, sorry. And so you can see that they're working closely with our officers and licensees, and then also supporting the CCRS activity and helping the research team out, working with consultants. They're just doing a great amount of work across the division and even supporting other divisions in the agency. So this team is really working out well where they're currently placed. The top advertising requests, we've heard a lot about this, so I just thought I'd share. General ads for cannabis, outdoor ads for cannabis, sweepstakes for liquor that we really couldn't. I asked why so many in that. There was really no event or no reason. It just happened to be a general increase for the month. And then also looking, like we talked about, at that FDA team, an additional number of inspections that's happening with our licensees still, but on behalf of the FDA, 676 of them so far this quarter. And then that consistent compliance rate of 88% for their checks. We committed to being transparent about in IA's internal affairs. This is not complaints on licensees, but complaints on our staff. We did have one case resolved in May and it was unfounded. And then talking about hiring recruiting, which is a big topic, we still hold at 26 vacancies. We've hired 4 LEO1s in the month of May. We still have 7 folks in background, 20% vacancy rate for LEOs, 14% vacancy rate when we include everyone, not just LEOs. And we had 1 lieutenant, Mo Leap, promoted. That's exciting for those of you that know Mo's history. She started in the director's office as an admin support for the director, and then won captain promotion, Jacob Garness. So if you have the opportunity to reach out to them and say congratulations, that is well deserved. We are doing recruitment events in June. You should see some buses. One of our harder areas to recruit in is up north in King County. So you should see some buses driving around with some LCB pictures. I think the officers that agreed to take those pictures would have liked to know where all we were going to use it beforehand. But now that we have the pictures, and then also very exciting, we have 8 people in the academy right now. So Director Lucella and I are attending a graduation at the end of the month. So we'll see some folks graduate, and then we have 4 more coming over the next couple of months. And we do have, I can't remember the number, whether it's 4 or 7, very different numbers, but we have 5 people waiting to go to the academy. I pictured, we have some people waiting to go to the academy.
4 or 5.
Yeah, and of course, always working on somewhere between 4 and 7. I should have written that down. And then we have, of course, as always, we're keeping up on our training hours. As you know, we're doing our LGBTQ+ training out of the academy certification, and that's all going very well. So I believe, my updates and notable partnerships. I will just share, we've been doing lots of work with our public health liaison, which is great because it's good for enforcement and public health to talk about things and hear how things impact in the public health industry, and that's been very positive. Captain Dixon did a presentation for the State Patrol titled Partnering with LCB to Reduce Problems from Licensed Businesses. One of our strategic goals is to educate our general enforcement partners about how we can work together and help them with things they're dealing with. We're participating in Target Zero. We worked with Ag on an unauthorized pesticide investigation, working with licensing to discuss food trucks at brewery premises, and then also lots of partnership and onboarding cooperations. We find things go a lot better when licensing and enforcement start out knowing each other's jobs at the beginning. So that's a growth and development that we've made in those 2 divisions. So any questions?
Didn't we have a rules petition on alcohol at food trucks
Yes.
that we rejected?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
So somebody will explain all that to me, because it says there that you have a workable solution.
Well, what the discussion that we're having and the concern from licensees is, can we have the food truck inside of our licensed premise? And so there's discussion about that being a separate business in a licensed premise. And so we just talked about those food. We want food where they're serving alcohol,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
So having those food trucks available and close to outside of the service area, as opposed to
Different.
inside of the service area.
And different than what the petition was to let
Yes.
alcohol sales in a food truck.
Yes.
This is to let a food truck inside the premises.
Or have them stay outside the licensed
But
premise,
be-
but be accessible for
Okay.
food.
Great, good. That
Yeah.
helps me. Thank you. Okay, thanks. We'll move to communications and Director Brian Smith.
Thank you, Chair Postman, and also to members Garrett and Vallendroff. Just as we always do, we start off with the media. The media is just, it's a steady trickle, I guess, coming in. We'll get 1 or 2 every day working on typically localized things. I don't see anything trending at the moment. One of those, though, is pertinent to this conversation is what Chair Postman had alluded to before, which is about product placement. We put together a statement that I released to that reporter today, and that involved eyes with most of the people on this table right here. And our public health education liaison was very helpful. Also been working with her, Chandra, she's been great. So moving on, I also did work, basically led the planning for the CANRA. CANRA wanted to branch out and have some engagement with the media. They don't want to go all in, but they want to go a little bit. And I helped them with a small team, but led that small team in developing a plan for them to be able to engage media in advance of the Minnesota meeting. I'm sure you'll hear Will talk about how that meeting went. But invited some national players that did attend and did do questions, as well as some select state media from around the country. So I think everyone met the needs of what they were looking for, and that happened and was out the door. So I'm glad to have that behind us. you've heard me say, for a while now that it's the 2024 is the year of technology for my team. I'm not gonna be a broken record there. We have some interesting things there that are exciting because I want you guys to know that that's where my team's trying to focus. I'll always have to do what I do. But when we're not doing other things, we're working on what we need to do for the website and the SharePoint. Chapter 3 is our vendor, a small firm out of San Francisco. Great team of professionals, and they're really helping us through. And we're using a number of tools to develop the structure of what that website's going to look like. And so it's based on like personas. That's a known way of being able to structure a website. Who comes to our website and how do they use it? And we know that our website is pretty transactional. People come here for a banquet permit. They come here to learn about mass training, all that stuff. Though we've had success with our social equity page, people don't really come to our page just to kind of poke around and kill time, right? They come here for a purpose. And so we want to be able to build a website that's going to be able to hit those users and they can find what they want quickly and easily. And also some of the structure of how we put together and package our stuff. Like, for example, she has us breaking it down into cannabis on the licensing side, cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco vapor kind of stuff, which I think is actually going to work in our favor going forward. So more to come on this over time, but it's been great to work with this vendor's been great so far. I've been really happy. We work with them every week. And we plan to roll out the go live September 16th. So here we are in mid-June. I mean, this thing's rolling along and we're going to get there and there's a lot to go through. So there, and simultaneously, that we're also working on transitioning our current intranet to SharePoint Online. We're doing that piece by piece. The first section is going to roll out from basically like a homepage. It's called the communications page, but it's really like a homepage. First thing you see when you bring up the browser. And that should go live right around the 1st of August. So that's the homepage, that's the IT page, and it's also the service desk page. And this one's just a little different because we're learning as we go. IT's learning, we're learning. We don't have answers to every question we have. We have to go figure those out. IT's doing a great job of being on that, trying to dog it with us, but a different experience. But we're going to get there and it'll be good. So moving on, just a couple of last things, just kind of wrap that up in addition to what we're doing. My team on the strategic plan, Julie sat in on the subgroup of the planning thing to help iron out some of those questions. She did all that in addition to what she was doing on the SMP project, and in addition to rolling out the policy and the plan for the governor's executive order on plain language and stuff. So Julie's doing a bang up job on all that stuff, and she's always a great volunteer. She's always willing to do whatever she can to fill up her time. And then Brad did the design work for the strategic plan itself. So of course he always does a great job. Take a look at it, looks good. So that's, it's the key stuff. That's the stuff we're working on, hurrying around, but that when we're not free and doing things that about, we're working on website stuff and the internet. So are there any questions about that?
And SMP. Your work.
And this,
Somebody who spends a lot of time. Yeah, no questions. Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Agency, general agency.
All right, thank you, Chair Postman.
Tony Hill.
Thank
Gotta
you,
say your
Chair.
name first, sorry.
Okay.
Tony Hill.
Thank you, Chair Postman and members Bollendroth and Garrett. Last week, Rachel Swanner and I attended the WACA conference in Walla Walla. I spoke generally about the state of the agency, and we both answered a lot of questions about the medical cannabis tax exemption. We sat on a panel with Shannon Ingalls, I think that's her last name, someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong, from Department of Health. She did an excellent job talking about all the WACs, and she was a great partner. I believe we answered a lot of WACA's questions. We spent most of the day with them answering various questions. That is one area where questions came up about packaging and labeling. And so I'm really glad that Director Smith gave us that presentation today and explained the timeframes for packaging and labeling, because there was some confusion about how long LCB takes in doing packaging and labeling because of the back and forth that often happens. And so it's not that a request is sitting here for a long time. It's often that it has to go back and forth. And so the sum total of time may be longer, but it's because there's back and forth. So I really appreciate Director Smith putting together that slide and showing us that today, so we can see the real data for that. We had a successful town hall on Monday where all of the directors presented information. And I was very excited that everyone shared pertinent information. I think it was great for all of our staff to see that. We had over 238 attendees. I don't know exactly how many, but I know when I looked up at the tally, we had at least that many. So I was very happy with that turnout. Regarding the SMP update, we executed our second amended contract with Accenture. And we are currently on schedule with SMP, but it is a very, very tight schedule. We have noticed a little bit of slippage, but we are meeting with the project managers every week to make sure small slippage doesn't affect the overall schedule. But we really have to stay on that because a few things slipping can quickly turn into more. And so that's why George Williams and I meet with them every week. We also include some of the Accenture executives in those discussions. I had a great meeting this morning regarding the decision package for phase 3 and 4. We had members of our E&E team there along with IT, and we discussed what we need for that decision package. And we came to a good agreement about what's inside scope for phase 3 and 4, what will be part of phase 3 and what will be part of phase 4. There's a lot of interaction between the board adjudication staff and the E&E notebook and vice versa. And so we have to be clear about where we're drawing the line for phase 3 development and work and where phase 4 development and work takes over. And they really kind of blend if you're not clear. But to have proper governance with our project, we need to have a line drawn. It's very important that we don't have scope creep. Otherwise, we can't stay within schedule and we can't stay within budget and follow all of our requirements. So that was a great discussion this morning, and I was very happy that everyone's working together to find a place where we can draw that line that makes sense while still trying our best to meet everyone's needs with phase 3. Also on decision packages, Rachel Swanner and Director Lucella and I will be meeting to look at the overall agency decision packages. The management staff had a chance to vote on what they think about all the requests that came through, and we're going to look at those voting results and figure out what we should ultimately put forward for our decision packages. Those decision packages include Director Smith's request for additional staff for label and packaging. So that is among the discussion. So yes, so we are considering that. There's a lot of very valid requests in there, so it's going to be tough to make the decision about what we should put forward. I believe I've spoken about this before, but just to let you know, we're still proceeding with our strategic portfolio management. Mallory Hayes is leading that work. We are building the fundamental building blocks for that. That's our decision-making framework, governance model, and prioritization process so the management team can coordinate and assess project work across the agency. And we're just about ready to do some cases, run some cases through there and see how it works. And that's moving along, and I think it'll be a great tool for us. And as Member Vollendorf knows, we're working on the focus groups. We're getting people signed up. Jessica Dang and Jim Weatherly are working with Member Vollendorf on getting those. Almost all of the dates have been arranged. I believe there was one that needed to be rescheduled, but we're encouraging staff to sign up for those. Early on, there were less staff signed up than there had been for last year. So we're trying to make sure we get the message out. We're trying to monitor that to see if perhaps every year is not going to work, but we'll just see, if we get enough people participating in that focus group. So I think it's a great idea, and I hope we get enough people to participate. The last thing I have is that we will be recruiting for a project manager who will work out of the director's office to help with the traceability project and with other agency-wide projects. And eventually, hopefully, we will be able to support a small project management office out of the director's division. That is our hope, if we can muster up the resources of the FTEs to do that. But the focus would be that on agency-wide projects and have coordination on making sure that we have the right amount of resources, the right amount of bandwidth, the right amount of money, of course, and we're timing everything correctly. And so looking at this from an agency perspective and having the project management skills to lead us through successfully.
Questions for Tony? Let's say on budget at some point, I think Will told me we'll bring that to the board, so the board will be briefed on what's in there and would be good for them to know sort of maybe even what didn't make it, so they can look at that. Okay. And now we will turn to Will Kellogg.
Sure.
And I'll give you that.
Good afternoon. Just a few brief highlights for May and thus far in June. The agency held an LCB administrative support retreat, which was attended by the majority of administrative support professionals. It was an opportunity for administrative support staff to collaborate, engage in team building, and participate in professional development and training. All of this is going to support the consistency and efficiency throughout the agency. Heard nothing but great things about it. Thanks to all the directors for their support and for all the staff that participated. Attended the State of Black Tacoma meeting, and it was very insightful for everyone that was able to attend that. Brian talked about the CANRA meeting, the external stakeholders meeting. I got to sit on a panel at the end of the first day talking about regulator insights and reflections. The topics of the CANRA meeting included interstate commerce, rescheduling, high concentration THC, equity, cannabinoid hemp markets, data, you name it, it became part of everything. And so it was an opportunity for all the regulators throughout the states to talk about similarities, differences, how to move forward. Lots of great conversations. And we'll be able to share some more with the board as time goes on, as we start to unpack some of this. And let's see, Tony mentioned the town hall. I actually enjoy the town halls. It's the opportunity for all of the agency to hear what's going on in the various divisions and to ask questions real time and get answers. So that's kind of what's going on right now. And like a few other staff, headed to the NCSLA conference here next week.
Okay, great. Any questions for the director? No, I had one leftover question, either for Director Wax and or Director Brian Smith. Director Hicks, we talked briefly about this maybe a month ago. Communications to cannabis growers at the beginning of the season about reminder on canopy measurement. Did we do something like that? Could we still? Is it too
In the
late?
newsletter. All right.
Can't remember. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
we
need
can put you on the spot. We
No,
can
I need
check.
to circle back with you on
I
that.
would appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Good. I also just want to say I used the new IT portal yesterday. It's amazing. It's great. So thanks to George Williams and his team. And, I've only been here. Yeah, we'll be able to get much more requests to you, Ray. 3.5 years, I never knew who to call. So it really worked great, and they did a great job. And also, I heard Tony, you were great at the administrative assistance support conference. That they really appreciated your time there and your vision of that. So well done. Okay. Hearing nothing else, we'll adjourn and we'll be back next week for one super duper meeting of caucus and board meeting together because Wednesday of next week's a holiday. So Tuesday, we're doubling up on that. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned.
Oh, easy Vista for a reason.
Yeah.
Easy.
Share some. Are we?